organisation you're from. The chat function for people that might be new to Teams. There's an icon at the top that says chat, and if you click on that, it should come up on the right-hand side of your screen. For people that are on their phones, it might not be as simple as that. But do try to join via the chat if you can, because then you can pose questions that way. There will be opportunities to verbally pose questions as well. But I know we've got a really exciting breadth of people planned to attend today from across arts and health, education, local authorities. So we're really excited. We know it's a smaller group because it's more specialised, but please do pop in the chat. We'll be using the hand function later, but if everyone can remain on mute with their cameras down whilst we do the presentations. We've got some new. Hi, Elliot. Great to see you. Hi, Michelle from the primary school. Ah, the dance lead at a primary school. That's fabulous. Great to see these different roles coming in. Leani is our research specialist. Tracy's popping hers in the chat as we speak. Carol's here from the Mental Health Trust, so we're delighted. We've got mental health organisations joining us because children and young persons' mental health is key to this initiative. Okay. Also, and Hannah's popping things in the chat already as well, and that's great. We want that to continue, this rich sharing of information. Okay, and before we start, and just to inform one of our panel members, Charlotte, has been delayed, but is hoping to join us by 11. And so hopefully she'll be joining us later. Okay. Fabulous. Do tweet if you can, but I think we will start now. It's 2 minutes past 10, but so welcome everyone. My name's Heather Corlett. I'm the programme lead for the Child Health and Wellbeing Network. I'm delighted to welcome you all here to our huddle and to share our very own STAR project. It's a smaller group than we usually have at our huddles, and it's much more specialised. So I thought it would be helpful if I quickly describe what the huddle is, in case people are thinking, oh, I've dialed onto this, but I'm not really quite sure what it is. So it's and it's also important. I'll then go on to describe the landscape that STAR came out of, because some people might have come from a non-health background. So I'll be doing that just quickly before I start. So a huddle. What is a huddle? So it's basically a meeting, this one's online, to share and explore ideas. So it's a very active, it's an action, and it's everyone is equal in this. It's a discussion that we want everyone to get engaged in, both with the Q&A, so please use the chat function. Chris will chair the discussion. You can use the hands up function, and you might be invited to speak as well, and we've got some panel members. So the huddle structure, it'll be top and tailed by an overview that Amelia and I are going to give from the network, so you understand what the network is, and as I said, that landscape. Then the meaty bit in the middle, you've got the main presentation, which is on the STAR project itself. We then have a quick comfort break when you can recharge your glasses with water and tea, and or equivalents, and then we will have the discussion in the second half of the session. So and then that's when you'll make some fabulous connections through the chat and through the discussions. So STAR is an amazing example of partnership working, and that's demonstrated in all the speakers in the agenda that's been shared with you earlier. It's also important to highlight it was issue focused. So we didn't just decide we wanted to do something creative. We had an issue around areas of high levels of deprivation, young persons' well-being and access to the arts. So we focused on that, and this was a project. And it's importantly that it came out of a lot of goodwill and a passion to work together. And ultimately, last but very much not least, it survived COVID. So this initiative was developed during COVID and still reported out even through that. We jumped and steered around it. So I just wanted to give you that context. So a few slides from me on the Child Health and Wellbeing Network before I hand it over to Chris. So for new people, we just wanted to explain what the concept of the network is, and it's clearly recorded there. And it's about working over those organisational boundaries. And importantly, it's to enable young people to thrive. So all the work we do is within that umbrella. And today we've got people not only from different organisations, but different parts of the sector. So we've got Carol here from a mental health trust, and then we've got Elliot here from a creative organisation. So how, if you bring those together, what can we do differently which will enable more people to thrive? So that's the overarching concept. And I think that's the kind of one thing to take from the presentation. And you'll see what we were asked to do is to share good practice, drive work forward and connect to experts. So that's the main thing. So there's some slides here that are going to come up, and some of them are for reference, so don't worry too much about the detail. So this explains the geography and some of those drivers as to why we set ourselves up in the first place. And you can see bottom left there, all the areas of red. This is from Public Health Fingertips data, and it's about the outcomes for our young people. And you can see from that sea of red, even if we have very good services, we might have fabulous health organisations delivering good quality care, but the outcomes are still poor because they're so dependent on those wider determinants of health. So that was the driver that kind of drove us to all come together across the whole system. So the next slide demonstrates how we engaged. And the chair that we have today, I'm delighted he was engaged from the very start of this journey, and it was very much trying to ensure that whatever work we did represented our large geography and the different parts of the child health and wellbeing system. It's really important that schools are represented. It's really important that we're working with our local health colleagues as well as our health ones. So you can see some of the actions and how we did that on that slide, and also the pictures. Children and young people themselves were at the heart of what we did, and you can see their involvement, both the Children in Care Council on the first picture, and the second one, our final event, young people themselves were actually chairing the event. So our priorities, they were given to us by the system. And I think it's important to just note that mental health was the #1 priority given by both the professionals and the young people, and poverty was the #2. So this work is focused to improve wellbeing in areas of deprivation. So, and those priorities are there for you to look at afterwards on the slides. That's the population of young people, and it's important to note we go up to the age of 25. This project is focusing on primary school age children, but we do have that wider brief. We have availability of some of those statistics that I highlighted earlier, and you'll see some of the links are on the slides. And I think this demonstrates our network, and I hope if you aren't already, you'll be joining the network and then you'll receive our regular communications. We have over 1,700 members, and you can see the breadth of organisations and geography within our North East and North Cumbria patch. And importantly, bottom left, we're delighted we have currently an apprentice called Adam who works down in Middlesbrough Council, and he's got a real interest in looked after children. So we really have a broad reach in our networks. Thanks, Amelia. STAR is one of a multitude of projects and initiatives, so we won't spend the time now on them, but Amelia's going to share some links of some upcoming work later on, and if there's anything you're interested in, do let us know, and there might be future potentials to work in partnerships. And finally, Al Ainsley Green, who was the first Children's Commissioner. This is an important quote from his book, The Betrayal of British Childhood. And he was one of our real key advocates in the beginning and still now, and the Huddle concept came from him. So it's fitting I end on that. And I'm going to pass over to Chris Drinkwater, who's our chair. And I think my ask today of you all joining us is to fully engage in the chat, but importantly, to think about how you might take some learning from today to enable more of those children to thrive in line with our vision. So thank you very much. So I'm delighted to pass to Professor Chris Drinkwater, CBE, and I can never do Chris justice because, and you'll note in the agenda his bio there, but he's a fabulous friend to the network. He's a core leader from when we first started in 2018. He's an exec representative from the voluntary sector. He's our operational oversight group chair. He's the driver of this STAR project, which wouldn't have happened without his encouragement. And he is the exec lead for arts and creativity. And so I'm delighted to hand over the chair to Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much, Heather. Very flattering of you. Morning, everybody. I'm Chris Drinkwater. My background is health and general practice, inner city general practice in the West End of Newcastle, and subsequently morphed into the voluntary and community sector. Healthworks Newcastle, Ways to Wellness, a social prescribing initiative, and most recently, Well Newcastle Gateshead, where we managed to get some money from Well North, which was a public health initiative, where we focused on the arts and health in 4 disadvantaged areas, 2 in Gateshead, 2 in Newcastle, and where we deliberately sort of decided that we were going to focus our efforts on 2 key areas, children and school readiness, and adults with mental health and loneliness, adults of working age, in those 4 areas, and out of that, a number of projects emerged. One of the projects was a project called With 7 Stories, which is the National Children's Book Library, basically based in Newcastle, where we looked at a project with the West End Schools Trust, 8 primary schools in the West End of Newcastle, and themed for reception class students, a project around my story, my place, my future, to begin to think about where the children had come from. And in these 8 primary schools, there's a very mixed population, many of for whom English is not a first language. And I think the key bits of that project is that developing that project, we decided we needed to do initial work with the teachers, initial work with the parents, because what happens at home is just as important as what happens at school, as well as work with the children in school. And we've kind of picked that up in the STAR project in terms of the work with parents is as important as the work with children. So that's clearly some of the context, and it was great to be able to bring some of that into the Child Health and Wellbeing Network and the development of Child Health and Wellbeing Network, which is probably why subsequently I've ended up as the Arts and Creativity Executive Lead, as well as the VCSE Lead, and sort of looking at how we carry that forward. There seemed to be a big opportunity in the STAR project and work in Teesside. And again, if you look at some of the data in more detail that Heather has already shown you, you will see that Teesside has a lot of significant problems around disadvantage, and some issues around sort of, again, if you map out, as the Arts Council does in terms of its funding, and look at numbers of people not involved in creative arts activities, who don't attend any of the Arts Council funded initiatives, there is a clear link between disadvantage and access to the arts. And the final point I just want to make before handing over is essentially to say there are some big opportunities around now around the arts and health and creativity. The All Parliamentary Group report in 2017 on arts, health and well-being was a big sort of catalyst to sort of getting some of this going. Some of that has now then been picked up by the Arts Council, who are very focused on addressing inequalities and addressing the needs of those who don't have access to the arts. And we're trying to sort of push that forward in terms of the Child Health and Wellbeing Network, and trying to push that forward in terms of the NHS and funding within the NHS. The NHS, as you will all know, has got lots of problems in terms of managing demand for services, long waiting times, all sorts of problems. But unless the NHS begins to invest more in prevention and early intervention, then we're not going to succeed. Some of the work from the APPG on arts, health and well-being identified that £1 spent on early care education saves up to £13 in future costs. And we all know that early intervention, work with children in reception class and primary schools is crucial to all of this, because if you're behind in reception class, all the evidence shows that through life you get further and further behind, and that has all sorts of consequences in terms of poorer health outcomes. And that's really a good point to sort of hand over and to sort of get into the nitty gritty of what this is all about. And I'm going to hand over to Leanne Kirkham, who I'm sure will be able to say a bit about herself. Leanne is Director of Learning from Northern Ballet and was involved in very early discussions about how we put this project together, and has been a great supporter of this project. Leanne, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's been a genuine pleasure to collaborate with all the various partners on this brilliant project. So for those of you that might not have heard of Northern Ballet, so we're a professional ballet company. We're based in Leeds. We create full-length ballets, things you might have heard of like Swan Lake and the Nutcracker. We tour those to kind of major theatres around the UK and internationally, but we also create short ballets for children. So they're about 40 minutes long. You may have seen them on CBeebies, but we also do perform those to kind of smaller theatres more regionally. There's several up in the northeast, and I guess the key driver for this particular project was our performances in Middlesbrough. And my role as Director of Learning is really about supporting Northern Ballet's core mission, which is to break down barriers to world-class ballet. And we do this by creating a range of different projects to make our work accessible to people of all ages and abilities. And that's both in terms of having a go at dance, kind of joining in, but also coming to the theatre to maybe see dance for the first time and hopefully create ballet lovers of the future. And I think the STAR project is just a wonderful example of how we can use really high quality arts to really positively impact people's lives, and hopefully change preconceptions about what ballet is and who ballet is for. So STAR evolved over a period of time, and it was certainly impacted in the very early days with COVID, sort of throughout 2020 and the early part of 2021. But I think during that really early development phase and beyond, the project ethos has remained really clear to all the partners involved, and it's kept everyone really motivated and kind of driving towards the same goals and outcomes. So like most projects, it started with a really good chat. So Heather, Chris and the team were clearly really keen to use arts and culture as a tool to engage and to essentially, you know, create happier and healthier young people in some of the most deprived regions, you know, of their remit. I was also really keen to collaborate on that. Northern Ballet had just done a project called Rise. We'd done a kind of pilot project, which was working with children in primary schools in West Yorkshire, which was very much about using dance as a tool to develop kind of positive mindset, creative engagement, body confidence, emotional well-being, and I was really keen to kind of say, well, how can we do this in a different way? I think a really key thing in the arts, and obviously in health, is that kind of research to really back up what we think. That, there's plenty of evidence that highlights, the physical and mental well-being benefits of participating in dance, and we wanted to dig a little bit further into that. And I think for me, the real driver was around how it's not just taking part in dance, but also seeing dance and experiencing dance at its highest level, and how that can impact, and also bringing the whole family on that journey. So I would say, I think it's really fair to say that, learning outreach departments at arts organisations are really good at getting in there and working with young people or working with particular groups of people, and understanding what the benefit of that is. What we're not very good at evidencing just yet is the genuine impact on well-being when people sit and watch a show, and what happens when we can bring the whole family into that experience as well. So I think there were two really key drivers for everyone, which was about happy, healthy young people and how we can use dance. So as you can see on the next slide, from all the various different logos, there were a lot of partners involved. And I think that really allowed for really rich conversation and a real diversity of perspectives. And I'd just like to take a moment to just shout out TinArts here, because, as I said, we're based in Leeds as Northern Ballet, and, we have limited capacity to kind of work really in depth in lots of different places. We do have a national remit. So for me, working with Tin was absolutely key to the success of this project. And I just wanted to shout out a big thanks to Martin, the artist, the whole team there for making the work such a success. So with so many expert partners around the table, it was really vital that we set up a kind of a list of driving principles, just to make sure that we were all moving in the same direction. So we developed 6 principles. So the first was about being responsive. So we all agreed that this work absolutely should be primarily focused on responding to the need that we knew was there based on the previous work that the network had done. The second principle was around co-production. So this was really key in terms of really drawing on the strengths of all the expert partners around the table and using a real asset-based approach. So, and really with that ultimate aim of creating outputs that were greater than the sum of our parts. And I think the project did that brilliantly well. The third was around being inclusive. So all the partners are really, really passionate about inclusivity, and making sure that the project was accessible to everyone was a real key driver. So this meant, first of all, us really understanding what those barriers were. Was that geographical, cultural, financial, all of the above, and then essentially finding ways to remove those barriers. The fourth was around building capacity. So all partners were really supported to develop and really embed the learning that had been acquired through the project, and the really kind of unique collaboration that was created. The sixth principle was around sustainability. Always quite a challenging aspect of any project, but it was thought about from the beginning. So we designed the project and built it with that longevity in mind. And one of the things that we did with our schools partners was look to develop ArtsMark, which is essentially a kind of a tool that schools can use to really develop their own strategy around how to really champion it and embed the arts within their schools. And I think the other key thing around sustainability was developing that evidence base, which you're going to hear lots about a little bit later on. But really the value of that is to help us to unlock funding for future projects based on, you know, the learning. And the final principle was around being iterative. So I think that comes quite naturally to colleagues both in the arts and the health sectors, you know, being able to respond to the need and take a really flexible approach. And I think it's fair to say this was absolutely challenged to the extreme as COVID was kind of thrown into the mix. But we were able to be really agile. We were able to kind of shift and adapt to those unique challenges at that time, and actually respond to some of those really specific issues that we hadn't anticipated at the beginning. So naturally, the participants were really at the heart of this project. As we mentioned earlier, all the partners were really keen to work with those people who have the most limited access to dance and, you know, wider arts and cultural activities, you know, due to whatever barriers they might face. We had two wonderful partner schools, Grangetown and Thorntree, and we worked with all the pupils in year 1 who are aged kind of 4 to 5, and all the pupils in year 5 who are aged sort of 9 to 10. That gave us a total cohort of 192 children. And I think it's just important to say that that was everybody. So boys, girls, regardless of, you know, any kind of disability, everybody was welcome. It also meant that we worked with the school leadership and class teachers, but we're also really keen, as mentioned earlier, to work with the children's families. So we invited them along at certain points within the project, and offered some specific support and interventions to those families who really needed that additional support, which you'll hear a bit more about later. So what did we deliver and how did we deliver it? So we had 2 specialist dance artists who went into each of those schools every week to deliver dance sessions. So this started fairly gently, and this was very much one of the things that we looked at in relation to COVID. So in the summer term of 2021, we did some really gentle introductory stuff. A lot of that was digital, sort of classroom based, fun sort of movement games, just to kind of get people used to the idea, like there's going to be some dance happening in your school. And it was really important that everyone had the opportunity to participate in that. Then from September 2021, for that whole academic year, it really kind of kicked in with those 2 key year groups at each school. And they had about an hour a week within their class groups, and it started gently, you know, gentle introductions, fun movement games, really about building confidence, about building a real excitement about taking part in dance. I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to appreciate that some boys in particular, especially in that older year group of year 5s, can be a bit like, I'm not doing dance, like, oh, it's not for me. But actually, what we do find consistently is that once they get into it and they realise that we're not going to make them wear tutus and tights and prance around, that actually it's really fun and it's a really, really great way of kind of working with their peers. So yeah, those weekly classes happened every week, come rain or shine, and there were other kind of key moments within that. So for me, a real highlight and a really important part of the project was that there were 2 theatre visits. So the first theatre visit was the children and their families came to watch a Northern Ballet production. So they came to see Pinocchio, which is one of our children's ballets. It's about 40 minutes long and a really gorgeous introduction to seeing narrative dance for the first time. Actually, I would say the vast majority of those children and their families had never seen a ballet before, and many would never really have been to the theatre before. The second visit was very interesting. So this was going back to the same theatre where they'd seen this, you know, top quality professional work and the kids performing themselves. So all of that brilliant work that they'd been doing with the artists over that academic year, they then got to go and have their moment to shine. I think it's important to say it was a bit scary for some of the kids and some were quite reluctant to do that, but then the sense of pride and achievement that those children felt afterwards was really quite moving. And again, the parents were invited along to witness that, and that was really, really special. There were we wanted to make sure that we included activities and support around the holiday hunger agenda. That was a real key thing at that moment in time, and actually, as we all know, isn't getting any better. So the way that we approached that was we worked more individually with the schools. So rather than the kind of project setting up kind of specific activity, we gave that autonomy to the schools. So we gave them the tools and the budgets that they needed to create whatever activity was best for them, which did include some artistic activity, but also essentially just kind of getting in their hot meals and checking in. And checking in was absolutely key with the families. And this is the point I'm going to hand over to lovely Carol. She's going to talk a little bit about the family support work. So I'm going to stop and over to you, Carol.
Hello, everyone. So as Leanne has described, one of the reasons that Children North East became involved in the project was because of how it so linked with our core values as an organisation. So about supporting children, young people and families to grow up feeling safe and loved, resilient to the challenges that they may face, and also valued and confident. So the whole programme from the outset mirrored a lot of the values of Children North East. So we collaborated closely with both schools that were involved in the programme and with the dancers that were working in the schools. And they identified children and families that we might work with in the family home. So what was really different about this from the school's perspective was that some of families that they found difficult to engage with, who had nervousness really around possibly social care involvement, we were able to then go into the family home, identify some of the issues that were being presented in the classrooms and in the dance, and work with the family hand in hand in parallel to the programme that was being delivered, and hopefully reach an outcome where we would be able to measure through an outcome star some progress, particularly around self-esteem and improvement in mental health. So we work with a small number of families, and Julia, one of our family support workers, built up a trust and relationship which allowed the families to open up and talk about their concerns, so that ultimately we were seeing a change in the behaviour of the children in the classroom, the behaviour of the children as they attended the dance. And they, particularly through the outcome star, which was our tool that we use for measuring, were able to measure around certain elements, including confidence and self-esteem, feelings and behaviour, education and learning, and then also for the parents around boundaries and behaviours, meeting emotional needs of their children and keeping the children safe. So the outcome star is a tool that we use two different stars, the My Star and the Family Star Plus. And my colleague Leanne will later go on to describe the impact measures. With this tool, it allows the individual person to rate themselves at the start of a journey. So it's really about measuring that journey. So for some children, you may see over a short period of time very little change, but really that in itself tells a story, because them not improving necessarily doesn't mean that things have changed for the worse. It means that they're recognizing the issues that they have, and that they're able to work with colleagues and work with professionals and address some of these very pent up emotions that they've felt for some time and have had no way of expressing. So the project collaborated on both the arts front and on the educational front, with the family support underpinning some of this, so that we could see gradual change in the children that were taking part. But for the parents themselves, it was very much opening their doors and being able to express how they felt about their children, about the progress they were making in school, and their ability to be able to help them in the long run. So I'll hand over to my colleague Leanne, who would be able to talk to you through about the research.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, so I'm Leonie Azevedo. I was part of the research team who supported the evaluation of this project. It was not just the University of Huddersfield that was involved, but we had University of Teesside and North Cumbria University. As Chris mentioned, we didn't just evaluate the children. So use especially if you deal with young children, it's better to use a more holistic approach. So we also look to the impact on parents, teachers, and also as we looked here, the views of the dance artists. I can see Rose, which was one of the dance artists here on the team. So I tried to share a little bit of what we found. It was a long report. It was I think 70 or 80 pages report. So it's hard to summarize in just a few slides, but I know that we're going to have more time later on for questions and answers. So I'm happy to go more in deep on some of these points. So if you move to the next slide, yeah. So here we have I'm starting just describing what we did with the children. We use primarily what we call a qualitative method, which involve interviews and focus groups, which are group discussions. And we did this with children. We also did some innovative ways to assess their views. One thing that we used was the graffiti walls, in which children, they added post-it notes to a wall with their opinion about the STAR program. So they put some words, what they think the STAR was about, how they feel about it. We use something that is usually used in journalism, which called vox pops. In this case, we give children a microphone, and they did kind of mini interview that they passed the microphone throughout them. And so they had the question, and they each one say what they think about the project or other questions that the researchers have to them. And we also use surveys. So if you go to the next slide. So here is the kind of result of what we had from the vox pop and the graffiti wall. You can see that children, the bigger words represent what was sent more often. So happy is a big word there. That was something that come across very. One thing that I want to mention is that it's very hard for to collect data from young children. It's particularly hard for the year 1 group. For the year 5, it's a little bit easier because they can express themselves more about what they feel. We can do the surveys, but this is something that us as researchers also learn about the process and how we could do it better next time concerning the evaluation. But what we got from the words of the children was that happy was a key thing. Amazing, you can see big thing there, fun, good. We also have tired. So we have little things that we could grab from the views, what the children thought about it. Then in the next one, it was a kind of the results what we got from the survey. So you can see that the vast majority felt that they started to feel more creative. And this is something that I was focused in particular on the teachers' interviews. And this is something that the teachers highlighted a lot during their interviews, that they found that the students were more creative. Some of the majority of them also felt that they were fitter, they were happy, more confident. A smaller proportion also said that they start to pay more attention in class and also be able to express themselves better through movement. Yeah, so in the next slide, we have very briefly what we have from the other groups. I think it was particularly to find what teachers thought about this project. Again, because I did these interviews, I just want to highlight a little bit further what I found it from the interviews with teachers. I found that it was like a change on perspective of the program. When they started in the START program in the school, the teachers were kind of a little bit worried about introducing a new thing into the curriculum in a time that they were already quite stressed, because it was a period where children were coming back from school, from COVID. They're trying to reestablish themselves at school. They had a lot to cover in the curriculum, how they could maybe do one more thing as part of the curriculum. But when I came back at the follow-up, they felt really the value of START, and they said that actually contribute a lot for children's well-being. And they also felt that it contribute for their learning the curriculum, because some of the stuff that they learn with the artists could actually be embedded in class. The storytelling, also being more able to talk about arts, which is something that Chris mentioned, that we're trying to link arts with health. So they said that actually lots of things that they did there helped to build on the learning materials that they had in class. They also sometimes notice improvement in behavior and children being build confidence. They talk about some particular children, they were very shy. They said there is no way this person is going to be able to do this performance at the end, that they really surprised them. So it was like a huge change on the perspective what the program could offer. So we can see here children more engaged in class, better listening, less disruptive behavior, improved creativity and literacy skills. Parents in particular mentioned that they were very proud of their children towards the end. Leanne mentioned that it was this performance at the end where parents came to watch their children performance, and they were very surprised about how well they did. One other thing that I want to mention that Leanne touched on was the fact of there is this stigma about boys and dance, that boys don't do dance. And this is something that was highlighted particularly for the children of year 5. The year 1, apparently this wasn't a problem because they're much younger, but the year 5 boys were a little bit concerned. And when they said, the teacher said that one turning point was when TinArts bring in class like a professional artist that was a male, and he told about his experience on dance, that he was professional, that he traveled across the world, and this kind of gives children an aspiration. Children that never lived in Middlesbrough said that there is a professional artist that is a male and in doing all these amazing things. So this helped a lot about engaging boys in the program too. So other things that we captured from artists, that they said that the activities contributed to children's creativity, social, cognitive, and physical skills, and helped to increase their confidence. And there was this thing about the link workers that Carol mentioned a little bit, that the support enable improved behavior in home. They also improve access to social, their network and families, and to be able to meet their emotional needs. Okay, so what are the mechanisms, how maybe START works? So we highlighted in the report that maybe there are 3 points that are key for the mechanism on how this intervention could work. So one is communication. So effective communication is key for the success of the program. Although it was highlighting the interview that sometimes some parts of the communication, particularly with parents, could be improved. This was, I think, in general, well done, and was a key for success. The connectional or embeddedness of the START program on the school curriculum. And there's also related to something that Leanne said about sustainability, how the program could be really embedded and be sustainable in the school in long term, so it can be disseminated to other areas. And finally, the collaboration between all partners, such as Carol Group and other groups, that is key to offer the flexibility. Although there was a highlight that maybe some partners struggle to engage further, and this could be highlighted in phase 2 of the STAR program. So here is actually the findings from Carol's group, so data that she collected from the outcome STAR. So they look how the team, how it affects the family support. So basically, they noticed that from baseline when they started towards the end, there was an improvement in 18% of families that were to set boundaries and improve behavior. 60% noticed an increase in social network, and 40% noticed an improvement in family routines. Some families also noted improvement on education and learning, being able to meet the emotional needs and keep them safe. But as Carol mentioned, it's not the group that haven't improved, that wasn't in this 18-60%, doesn't mean that had a negative experience. These things are quite well-being, something that change quite like daily, sometimes hours, so it depending on where you measure, but seeing like almost a 20% improvement, and also the fact that she reported a better communication with families, I think this was key for the success of the group and to this whole holistic approach. So I think now we're going to move to a video where we're going to start. TinArts kindly prepare for you to give you like a little bit of feeling of what the intervention was about. Thank you.
I just want to rudely interrupt, Martin, so I can introduce you, because a very important day was had yesterday, and we're embarrassing you by putting a picture that you shared with us, because you received your MBE yesterday. So we're very proud, and Martin and Leanne gave him a shout out earlier. He's been driving the STAR project. He's the programme director at TinArts, which was founded in 1999, and he took on the role of Arts and Creativity Advisor to the network last September, and he's delivered the delivery of the STAR programme. So I know you wouldn't say any of that, well, not all of it, so I just wanted to suitably embarrass you and also celebrate your achievement. Well done.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm going to kind of close off, I guess, this first part of the session about STAR. I think one thing's worth saying, I can spend hours on the train preparing what I'm going to say and all these slides, but actually just listening to young people's voices for 1 minute about their personal experience of STAR captures everything that we could tell you in an hour about the STAR project. And also that those videos were taken with the young people, with a videographer, with no adults in the room. So as in it was their own, unedited voices. That's what they wanted to express, and that's how they had to say it. There was no script reading or poking to see things. So a little bit more about actually what's one of the most amazing outcomes from STAR so far has been the formation of the Arts and Creativity Advisor role. So STAR kind of started a momentum to explore this, and Chris has been quite highly recognised for being an initiator behind this whole thing. And one of the things that will then go forwards and beyond is the role of arts and creative advisor. And you can see on the slide ahead of you the kind of things we're looking to achieve with that. And I'm going to hold on to the role for the first iteration of it as we develop. But really, this is about great practice being connected together and collaboration. I think there's so much great work happens, and arguably it's a little bit in silo, and that's because of busy lives and busy capacity. And what we're trying to do is make sure that the health sector and the art sector come together and find opportunities to connect, to share what already exists, but also to look at what can be done next. What can we discover and develop and devise that can go forward from here, actually? Drawing upon STAR, but also drawing upon many other projects and programs that we're aware of that tackle this area. And I put in the chat as well that I'm going to, if you wish to contact me about, I can talk about other projects, programs we're aware of. And from STAR 1, there are some resources that are available online, and you can see these through the TinArts website. And we have 3 films. One is about a 10-minute overview film of the whole year, really brilliantly described by Leanne earlier on about what happened and when it happened, as well as interviews with teachers and senior leaders and artists and young people. We have a little shorter focus film about the families and the work that Carol and Children North East have been doing behind that. And we have some very quick sound bites from the teachers themselves about what they're seeing in the classroom environment and the dance space. Alongside that sits a shorter overview report, which captures the key findings across the year, as well as a much longer, more in-depth full research project, which also shows you a lot of the data and what was gathered together to actually understand those findings and learnings. And they're all available on the TinArts website to be watched and downloaded. So what actually happens to happen from the conclusion of STAR 1 in July 22, sorry, is to then look at delivering STAR 2, version 2, from September onwards. And this was about finding a way to expand and make this more universal and to continue the learning, but actually to lift it away from just a small group of pupils. Arguably 190 is not a small group, but it's still a contained group. And we're now working across 3 schools and reaching over 900 pupils. Now, anybody who works in schools a lot will know that's quite a lot of young people to reach in 1 year of practice in what we're doing. So we found a much more condensed model to do it. So we've found, and in a minute we'll talk about the kind of how that breaks down. But as you can see, we're looking at replicating what we've learned through STAR 1, but finding a much more universal way that more young people can engage in that and therefore feel the outcomes and impacts from that. So we work in shorter blocks. So rather than doing the whole year, which is what the first STAR 1 pupils did, they did the whole September to August period. We're actually looking at doing smaller cohorts, and you start and stop within an 8-week period, and then the next cohort starts. We can get through all the pupils. We're looking at how digital can enhance that as well. And as Leanne talked about, the live experience is crucial and vital, and still has some part in STAR 2 and will be part of STAR 2. But we're also looking to see how digital can offer us greater access and more usability and being able to connect into the content. We're looking at not only what happens in the dance space, but we're looking at how the teachers and pupils can take that learning back into the classroom and do enrichment tasks there, as well as more tasks and activities that can be done at home that pick up the themes from what's happening in the school. So taking that family unit, that family journey alongside the young person is really still crucial and vital and being held on to in STAR 2. The family support work with Children North East continues, and as well as that wider family engagement, and also to signpost into local areas and activities that are happening. One of the big learnings in STAR 1 and has come through STAR 2 is that young people are developing a genuine interest in more arts engagement and wanting to do more arts, particularly dance. So how can we look at what's in the area that young people can be signposted to? And we continue to evaluate, we continue to revise and refine and test what we're doing and to see how we can do that better, essentially, as we go, and what the impacts are of the work. So moving forward from there, this is what the little 8-week block looks like. And this is a repeatable, consistent block. So all pupils, and the classes will go through the same repeating pattern. Start off with an introduction to what we're doing. How does dance work in the space? How do we engage with that? Explore the meaty part, if you like, of the actual thematic content, which is sessions 3, 4, and 5, exploring resilience. And this time round, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 are doing slightly different pathways. So Key Stage 1 are exploring Ugly Duckling and around making friendships and being a good friend to people. And Key Stage 2 are looking at Merlin, which is a ballet by Northern Ballet, which is about a young person who essentially hides their ability and hides their talent, and by the completion of the piece actually is more proud of who they are and shows their talent. And that's about confidence and being your authentic self and who you are. Sessions 6 and 7, we reflect upon what we've learned, bring together all the ideas both in the space and outside in the classroom. And then in session 8, we're looking for ways to celebrate, to continue to share back with the family what's the journey we've been on, what's the learning we've got, and how do we go forward from there. So that a year program has now been condensed much more into an 8-week replicable block, which makes it more sustainable and means we can reach more young people. And the next slide down. It just offers you something about, if you haven't seen this, this is on the Boing website, and I can put once I finish talking, or if somebody else can, I'll put it into the chat. It's a resilience framework, and it's evidence-based, and it's using known ways and methods that has been shown to have an impact on young people around resilience and development. So we're using this, and the next slide will show you how we're, for example, adapting this into Key Stage 2. So for each of the areas, basics, belonging, learning, coping, and core self, we've highlighted a key area that we want to address within the work. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to be consistent and continuous in how we're working. So all young people are getting a very consistent offer across the programme. But it means that STAR is also reflecting and taking note of external frameworks. So it's not operating in the silo, it's actually looking at wider ways of working and an evidence-based system, which means hopefully that'll increase the chances of achieving the outcomes we want to achieve. And as we go forwards down, we can see that these are some of the areas, the initial evaluation we've done from the first little cohort that happened in the autumn. And these are just, there's a lot more evaluation happening across that, but I've just picked out some highlights. What's really interesting is those young people in STAR 1 went through a whole year. The cohort in cohort 1 went through 8 weeks. And actually what we're seeing is making you feel creative, making you feel fit and healthy, making you feel confident. Those numbers are comparable and matched with how STAR 1 went. So we've managed to replicate, make it more condensed, and actually, but hold on to the outcomes and hold on to the impact that's happening in STAR. And the bottom one is very relevant to Key Stage 2. So this is much more tailored to the content they're exploring. And you can see make you feel proud of yourself is where the numbers are at the moment, which is about 70% of young people indicated that. And what we're trying to do is look to shift the whole little green lines further up towards the 10 as we go on. So the evaluation you're not seeing here is the constant work with the teachers in the classrooms, where we have conversations and constant sharing of information to go about how do we make that part of the 8-week things better? How do we resolve that? How do we refine and improve these areas? So we're still testing, we're still piloting, we're still trying to find better ways. And we're hoping that will kind of come through in the findings as well. And as we go into the next slide down, this just talks about where STAR is going from here, I guess. So we're trying to, as today is a great example, we're looking to share the learning, to encourage more collaboration and implementation. How can STAR go forwards? And actually, how can STAR go forwards as a music project, as a drama project, as a creative writing project? We started from dance because we think myself and Leanne, Northern Ballet, and the artists we work with, that's our history and that's our background. But we think actually other art forms can engage in that. And what we need to do are the two things below is then unlock future funding, find ways to resource STAR, and also find the right partners to come and engage in STAR. So it's a very open collaborative forum where we're working constantly with different partners to find the best ways to do that. And that then forms a community of practice where we can come together from different sectors, from different expertise and areas of skill and knowledge to look at how we can refine and develop. And as Leanne said, STAR 1 started with a really good chat, and it's the good chats and the continuous chats that help. What we have the real good advantage now is we have young people who can contribute into those conversations as well and can help us co-produce what it is we do and how we do it in response to what they're doing. And the next slide down. Just a quick shout, which is always very important to recognise who has supported. So the foundation stages, those early chats and those testing ideas were supported through the Tees Valley CCG and the North East North Cumbria Mental Health Clinical Network. STAR 1 was primarily supported mostly by the NHS Charities Together, and currently we are being supported by Culture Bridge with funding via Arts Council, which is partly supporting STAR 2, but also exploring the role of arts and creativity advisors as we go forwards, which will actually roll through until 2025. There's a lot of time to explore and develop new collaborations and projects around that. And I think I might have one more slide. I don't have one more slide. Oh yeah, it's the best slide of my bunch though, I must admit. So I think I can hand back over to Chris if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Martin, and a big thank you to all of our speakers. You've kept brilliantly to time, 11 o'clock precisely. And for the rest of the audience, I know you've had a lot of information thrown at you. You've now got 5-minute break to reflect and to come back with questions for the Q&A session. We've also got some reflections from a panel, a school's perspective, a local authority perspective, and a dance perspective from one of the dance artists, basically, about how this has all worked. I think the sort of the key questions are how do we spread this and how do we keep this going? So any gems, pearls of wisdom from the audience about how do we spread this, how do we keep this going, would be very welcome, because yes, as Martin said, we've now got some Arts Council funding that takes us to 2025 for the Arts and Creativity Advisor. But that's not necessarily going to deliver programmes in schools if we're going to spread it initially across the North East and North Cumbria. And I think it also has potential to spread much wider. So some key questions there. Let's have a 5-minute break, comfort break, pick up a cup of coffee or something, and we'll see you back here at 11:05. Thanks very much. think everybody is back now. Welcome everybody. I'm going to kick off with questions that people may have, and then ask for some reflections from our panel, basically our panel of three, from schools, local authority, and dance perspective. But just sort of a question from me at the beginning to sort of all of our speakers, if you like, which is really around sort of, we know there are some real problems around sort of resilience, self-esteem, mental health in young people, and the NHS isn't really coping with the demand for services. But there is very little about early intervention and prevention. And I suppose a question really about, some people will argue that we ought to take a targeted approach to the most vulnerable and work with the most vulnerable, whereas this project has been about all of the children within a school. And there's something in there around sort of, well, there is stigma around mental health and mental illness, and people don't like to talk about mental health and mental illness. And if you focus on those most vulnerable, you increase stigma. Whereas if you take a whole population approach in terms of all of the children, you address some of the issues. And I'm just interested in sort of reflections from any of our speakers about sort of the importance of addressing all of the children rather than those who might be identified as being most vulnerable. Martin, do you want to pick that up as a starter?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the sense that making the project universal, and there's a few things. What was really interesting in Star One was how those young people who were taking part also had siblings in other classes. So there was a very genuine excitement across the school about what was happening and what had taken part in those sessions. So actually, through the Star One, we did also look for opportunities to open up the program at times for pupils from across the school, actually, so that not only were you reaching the young person, the family, you were also reaching siblings on that journey as well. But I think it's about that universal approach where everybody can take their own journey within that, and that's why we had started. We've also looked at the content and making it age appropriate as well, and how we reach Key Stage 1 and how we reach Key Stage 2 with slightly different content and slightly different conversations and what places of exploration. And where the artists become really valuable asset is to follow those journeys for the young people. Young people then start to express interest in areas within dance and or the content that happened from Pinocchio in year 1, and then this year it's Merlin and Ugly Duckling, and to explore that and to go on that journey. And that's the great thing about dance, personally, is there's a lot of space and room to follow journeys and ideas and themes that emerge, and responding within that. A lot of the content is very much about creative engagement, and it's not we show and you learn, but actually we facilitate ideas and movement and how you can express that. And a lot of things that came through Star One is how young people express through physicality. When words are not enough, if you like, that they can find their way of kinesthetically sharing where they're up to and how they're going. And I think Leanne can kind of follow up and talk more around that bit as well, actually.
Yeah, I was literally, yeah. Oh, sorry, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead, Leanne, and then we'll come to Heather, who's got a hand up as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that the fact of kind of the whole class joining in and everyone being able to access it, I think what we often find in these kinds of projects is, because there's so much collaboration, kind of peer collaboration. So we set up kind of creative tasks where, work with a partner, and we really encourage them to work with different people. And actually the kids can learn a lot about themselves through working with other people. And that can have really, really big impacts and really great benefits in terms of, how they not only work together in that space, but then how that then filters out into their wider world. So in the classroom, in the playground, and then kind of more social connections at home as well.
So there are some real lessons about how you operationally do this on the ground in terms of that partnering and the children working together to express themselves that are incredibly important. Heather and then Liani.
Thanks, Chris. And I just want to speak for Charlotte, because I don't think she's managed to join us yet. But in those initial discussions with the schools, they were really keen and influenced us and said the only way they felt to do it, especially for those families in the highest having the highest struggles around deprivation, was that it was an all-class offer, because if it was anything but part of the curriculum, then it was those very children you wanted to reach that wouldn't be reached. So I just wanted to highlight that point, because she's not been able to join us as yet.
Okay, thanks for that. Liane, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just want to do some cross-learning. Like when I do interventions on physical activity, that sometimes we argue like intervention that for physical activity should target obesity. Should it just go for the obese children in the class? But then it's a problem of stigma. So then we usually try to use the universal approach. However, just thinking about the STAR, although it is universal, the cluster is actually targeting inequalities, because they pick the schools in the highest deprived areas in Middlesbrough and Redcar. So the school itself is a niche that has a lot of inequality. And I think using the universal approach of the whole class was better for the reasons that Martin said, about also include that, because that learning also passed sometimes to their families. There was a lot of feedback from the teachers about how important was to bring families in, especially on the performance, how included they feel on this aspect. So it wasn't just the individual that participated in the dance session that was benefit for the whole program, but their siblings, their family were also the benefits reflect on them too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Just picking that issue up about inequalities. Those of you in the NHS will know that the NHS, in terms of addressing inequalities, has developed this model called Core 20 plus 5. The Core 20 is the 20% most disadvantaged areas. And just sort of picking up that point in terms of, if we're going to spread this, and if we're going to sort of target the most disadvantaged areas in terms of a whole population approach, then we should be looking at the 20% most deprived areas and working with schools in those areas across the North East and North Cumbria. Thank you for that, Emilia, for having that slide to the ready, Core 20 plus 5. Do raise your hands if there are any other questions. And I just want to bring in Rose Payne, who was one of the dance artists, in terms of some reflections from Rose on how this has been from a dance artist perspective. Rose.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think Martin's probably already said it so well, but I think what strikes me, and through last year and into this year now as well, is that it's sort of hopefully giving the children the sort of more confidence to express their ideas. So, it's that validation, isn't it, of who they are, and that their ideas count, and that they are creative or can be creative. Through kind of building up trust. So with this iteration of STAR, it's a quicker process. So it feels like, we haven't got as long to build that trusted relationship with them. But the positive is that there's an intensity to it with this second version of STAR, learning from last year. There's this sort of intensity that we're really kind of immersed in it, although we're still seeing them once a week. There's a different feel to it. So it's always quite hard to distance yourself from it when you're in there delivering it through every single week. But I think it's that kind of confidence, that you see build up through the weeks when you see each class for 8 weeks or a year last year, that you suddenly notice a child who's just starting to contribute a tiny bit more, or starting to respond to an idea, and you just start to really note, and you just see them go, at the beginning they would sort of stand there and say, I don't know what to do, and I don't know, maybe they don't think their idea is any good, or that they're responding in the right way. And I think it's that build up that we can do, that by the end they can say, this is my idea, this is how I want to move or respond to the task that you set me, and I'm confident enough now to say that's my idea, here it is, and that I'm part of this class equally with everybody else. Yeah, I think that's what is most important to me, I think, at the moment, particularly working really well with the themes that we're working on with these two dances, with Ugly Duckling, with Merlin. And it's just in my head, because we're so involved with Merlin at the minute with the Key Stage 2s, and the idea of identity, and just getting the feeling that some of the questions that I'm asking, and then the responses and the tasks that I set, that those are questions that either somebody doesn't ask, or that they've not had a chance to think about. They're a new thing of just, who am I? What am I like? What am I good at? What do I not like? And you can sort of see a bit of thinking, and it takes some time, and then we get some movement going with a task based around it. And that's been quite tricky, I think, that kind of, because I think it's quite tricky for everybody, really. Like, who am I, and what's my personality, and what am I good at? And that's felt really important, and a really great thing to be doing. And that we can now, with STAR 2, see, because we're going across all the year groups. So within Key Stage 2, you've got, year 3s, and then you go up to year 6s. So it's really interesting to see how the year 6s respond to that same task that you've set, and then how, in contrast to how the year 3s might respond to it. And it's really useful to see that, and to just to see, where to pitch it. And sometimes, you think the year 6s are going to be kind of up to speed with a certain idea, and it's new to them, and it's that thinking that that we can do, as well as lots of moving as well. So yeah, I think I don't know if anybody's got any questions about that, or if it makes sense that I'm waffling on.
I think Martin wanted to come back, and Liani. Shall we start with Martin and then go to Liani? Martin.
I'm just going to build on that, and I guess it's a little bit very, very specific to dance, actually. Dance happens in the moment, in that space, and it's a very live, iterative thing. And I think going forward, as we explore, maybe, for example, STAR and creative writing ends up in a tangible process that can be printed, shared, seen, distributed. The trust that happens within the dance sessions, it's there in the moment. And actually, and often when you go towards performative work with young people, it becomes a rehearsal process, it becomes a staging process, and although you get to celebrate and acknowledge the achievement, you kind of lose that in the moment response and in the moment development and change. So a lot of the work has been working with the artists and teachers to see and recognize and to capture those moments there and then. And although we have made some short films, and I recommend you go and see particularly the 10-minute film about the process, where you get to see some of that movement. You're never going to quite be able to reimagine that moment of that change or that connection you see in the space. So there's a lot of trust that happens of that it's there, and it exists, and it's present in the moment.
Much more difficult to pick that up online.
Yeah.
Liani.
Again, just to build off what Rose said, and something that I heard from the teachers, they praised Rose and Tertia about being able to give the children the confidence, but by saying that there wasn't really a right and wrong, they're just expressing themselves. And they said that Rose and Tertia was really good to capture the children's personality and see how would they fit better in the performance. They mentioned things that was said before, I think by Martin or somebody else, about pairing. They said about pairing children that were a little bit shyer with children that were a little bit more confident, and they work together very well. So one thing that I also want to relate is again, in my area of physical activity, sometimes children that when they do PE classes, they don't enjoy physical activity because they don't have the skills the physical, the motor skills to do that task, and then they become inactive. And I think what this dance program is performing is that they're giving the children the confidence so that they can still do it, even if they are not like as good as it. Because there was people in that group that they mentioned that some girls have done dance class before, but they were not really highlighted comparing to the ones that never done before. So I think this inclusivity on the way that Rose and Tertia approached the program was very successful and was well seen by the teachers.
Thanks, Leanne. I'm going to bring in Elliot Smith from Elliot Smith Dance. Elliot, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. I just wanted to say, just a brief note to say, wow, from an outside perspective at Elliot Smith Dance, that this is totally inspiring, especially for independent companies who are working at the moment with 2 primary schools in the Newcastle area. And I just put a link into the chat box about what we did last season. I think the question that I, not to be answered now, and maybe to not to come across biased, but how do independent companies be able to connect? How are independent companies able to reach further? How can independent companies be involved more in this? And of course, the horrible question that we all hate, funding. How do we continue to fund great projects like this? But just to finish on that note, to say again, well done to the team for doing this, because I know when I'm going into schools, the realization and the impact it has on children goes much beyond the creativity. It's about their well-being, it's about their confidence, it's about working as a team, it's about realizing that you can be something not just as a dancer, but in any art form or any career. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Elliot. If we're going to do more of this, we're going to need more independent dance companies involved. I mean, I think the point that Leanne made right at the beginning is that a national organisation like Northern Ballet, based in Leeds, doesn't have the resource to do things at local level. So partnering with local dance organisations is key to this. And I suppose sort of moving forward, that hopefully is going to be part of Martin's role as the arts and creativity advisor, to actually sort of almost collect a register of dance companies across the northeast and North Cumbria and look at a place-based approach within a wider sort of framework, almost a national framework. So that would be where I would be coming from, and I think we will certainly be making contact with you, Elliot, as subsequently following this meeting. Rose, did you wanted to come back again? I think, and then we've got Chris Bugles as well.
Yes, just thinking a bit more about the physical health side of the project and obesity and that universal approach, and something I think Leanne, you said in the chat about narratives and the choice of narratives, and I talked before a lot about a kind of the resilience side of things and the mental health side of things, but I think it's those narratives that I have seen that. So although the children know it's a dance session, they know it's going to be physical and moving, we're not going in there to learn steps and learn moves, and there won't be that physical pressure. So it's almost the inspiration, the ideas from the dances that they've seen, and I can see that with some of the children, it's captured them. And although they may have some difficulties with physicality, or it's just not their favorite thing to do, they don't see themselves as movers, we see in the session suddenly they are, you know, being really physical with a certain idea and a task because they're just caught up in the task and the characters and the narrative or what's been asked of them. And so that's quite a successful approach and lovely to see.
Okay, Chris Bugles. Chris.
Thank you, Chris. I will ask this question in the I've had a very bad internet connection, so apologies if this has been addressed. I've kind of lost chunks of the meeting, but I'm just wondering about the if there's been any kind of consideration given to the application of the framework in sort of a cross-cultural context as opposed to just dance, and if that was something that's either been thought about or being thought about for the future.
It's certainly something that the network has been exploring. We've been involved in sort of some performance in terms of theatre performance with primary schools, and looking at how we take that forward. And I do think it has potential. And clearly the work that we did as part of Newcastle Gateshead with 7 stories around Story Kitchen, which was about food and cooking and stories, as well as the My Story, My Place, My Future initiative, which was about stories about where you've come from, about the place you live in, and about what your future aspirations might be, are all part of that. But I think the key principles that Martin outlined earlier still hold around co-producing, around responsive to need, and around involving families as well as the children, and also involving the teachers, are a key part of that. So I do think it has potential to expand across other art forms.
Thank you.
Heather.
Thanks, Chris. And just to add to that and say, indeed, when we explored and some of those chats that we had at the beginning when we were designing STAR, there was a similar example in Gateshead that the local authority were delivering in relation to arts. So, and for us, and Martin's role is as the arts and creativity. So we're definitely looking at the wider model of arts, but it's about, we have the model which is STAR, which is dance-based, and it's making sure that that's sure and steady, but then we'd welcome it reaching into other areas. And I don't know, and I can see Laura's got her hand up, Chris, because she'd added in the chat a question in relation to the wider context, so she might want to come in on it too.
Laura, over to you for a local authority perspective.
Yeah, sorry, I maybe do that reflection. I was sort of waiting to see where it went, but I think there's some really relevant points. So I joined the local authority in 2019. I'm not from a health background, but what I'm particularly interested in is the impact that creativity has on people's lives. So I remember getting briefed. I ran a national portfolio organisation that was dedicated to theatre for young audiences in Darlington. And so I remember having conversations about STAR from the beginning, but I wanted to give a bit of context about some of the work that's happening, because I think project-based stuff is really great. I think reflecting, and I know that I've had this conversation, that the funding for STAR 2 is quite a shift change because it's primarily arts funding, and that for me is slightly problematic because we've got this history of health funding coming in project based but then vanishing, and for me the only way we're going to make a shift change is so that's fully integrated. So in the South Tees, culture sits in Redcar and Cleveland, culture sits within public health, and for me that was a really important point, because that impact is fully embedded with those conversations in terms of public health planning, but also connections with the NHS and others. And the public health offer is across the South Tees, hence me mentioning that I've become the, I don't know, nominated creative health lead, but probably because it's a passion. And I think for me, what we've got to get to a point of is being able to increase the resilience within the sector. So there's been a few points in terms of Elliott Smith Dance around how do you get opportunities, but also from my point of view, how do you know that the quality of the offer is there, and the the knowledge within that sector to deliver it against sort of mental health outcomes or resilience or whatever it looks like, because you're potentially delivering against and dealing with complex needs. So I think that's another part. So we certainly within the South Tees were particularly interested in how creative health is completely embedded with the health and wellbeing strategies, and that is something that our Director of Public Health is really championing, is really for, and we've also been working with the National Centre of Creative Health around that big agenda in terms of the review, so right across children and young people to adult social care, and really thinking about how creativity is part of that conversation across all art forms. On the children and young people point of view though, I think that everyone's mentioned about poverty, mental health, and certainly that is going to be obviously for everybody, but an ongoing mission and goal for us going forward. So I suppose from some ways there's huge potential there. But again, for me, one of the biggest things that we've got to get to a point of is having it embedded within the health structures. So I think we've done quite well in terms of creating resilience within the sector. There's more to do. We've got a range of pilots that are happening. Tin are delivering another pilot for us in terms of in the South Tees. We've also got some work happening around attachment in terms of early years. And Chris, I agree that early intervention stuff, it's my big bugbear, because we know what creativity can do from pre-birth, in fact, right through, and we know the impact that can have in terms of people's life chances. But actually we end up being able to go into that sort of project-based targeted approach quite often because of money and because of pressures and because of everything else. So I think for me, the thing that I'd like to see happen and what I'm particularly interested in is, I think the new model is really good, because I think there's huge opportunities around the needs of our children and families directorates from a local authority level point of view around people's mental health, and children and young people's mental health. So that presents an opportunity to be able to deliver against it. But we've got to get to a point where we work collectively together to make NHS, commissioners and other people really embed creative health within the thinking. And you can look at models in, for example, West Yorkshire at the minute, a pilot and a model around how creative health is embedded within the ICB. That is something for me that I'm like, yeah, it's really lovely to do a project, but someone needs to have that completely embedded across all strands and be really championing it. And I think together, where we've got evidence like this from the success of STAR, that gives us something really tangible and exciting. We've got a range of other case studies that we're taking forward, and also the work that's been happening will be embedded within our creative health strategy. So that's another thing to say. So in the South Tees, we're developing a creative health strategy that really sets the stall, but also we've got a commitment that in the development of our health and wellbeing strategy for public health in general, the consultation around that is all going to be done creatively to be able to get a different response to things like the joint strategic needs assessment that have to be done from a data point of view. And I think that also shows a shift change in terms of the approach in the South Tees. So the hope is that strand of work will be completely embedded, and therefore commissioners will value the work and the approaches to that work.
Thanks very much, Laura. Great to hear that passion about creativity. And I'm sure you're right. I think there are opportunities in the North East and North Cumbria, particularly if we devolve budgets to place-based and link it to the health and wellbeing strategies at place, to really make this happen. But it does need some support, if you like, from the centre, from the ICB, to say, how much of your local place-based budget are you going to be spending on creativity and health?
Yeah, and just to come back on that, I'll shout out. I don't know if anyone from Northumberland is on the call, but they've obviously been doing a big piece of work as well around creative health, and we've been on a bit of a journey together. Different different places in that, but certainly the connections from a national level. And I also think being able to feed into that national approach that has you know, a range of brilliant, amazing health people and NHS people, as well as sort of cultural people, is great, because it's pushing it forward, and the moves from an Arts Council point of view is really interesting. I think the other point I wanted to make, sorry, is I know there was reference about holiday activity funding. For some reason, I also have a bit of overarching responsibility in terms of holiday activity fund for the South Tees, in terms of steering that forward and making it have more of a legacy, I suppose, in terms of the DFE money coming in. There's challenges around that, because obviously it only happens in holiday time, but actually I am particularly interested in what that looks like across the year and later. And I think there's some real potential there in terms of maybe the rollout, especially around the summer period in particular. But that could follow up at, you know, we're looking at certainly for the South Tees, and I know Durham doing it a different way in commissioning models and other places. But there's something around, if you've got Easter, summer and Christmas, which it generally falls around, there's still a pathway that could be delivered. And actually, if you looked at the digital work and that digital resilience work that Martin touched on, that could happen in between, and if you could upskill certain people within schools or other places as well, that potentially gives a different pathway as well, with potentially larger amounts of money as well at times. But again, that money, we don't know when that money is going to stop, which also gives. So I think we've got to get to a point, I think, Chris, like you said, around the ICB commitment and a mixed model of arts funding, trust funding, and health funding, because it is problematic. And, you know, not necessarily in this world, but social prescribing is brilliant, and we're seeing some amazing stuff, but that comes with referrals quite often into arts organisations who are going, wow, this is amazing, but actually a lot of that stuff is funded by arts funding, not health. So you've turned a tap on, and you know, where does that stop really? So the resilience of the sector is another part that for me is really important, and I think commissioning sides need to understand that if they value the impact, they need to put some money there as well.
Thank you for that. Leanne, I'm sure you wanted to come back, and I'm hoping you're going to come back and sort of say something about how do you ensure quality of provision.
That's exactly what I was going to touch on, actually. I also just want to say, Laura, I think you're amazing. It's really nice to meet you. Yeah, I think quality control and in terms of scalability is always a big question mark and can be a challenge. But I think that's why right from the beginning, when we're talking about the sustainability, that research is really key, because it helps us to really understand and articulate what are the things that are making this successful, and then we can share that more broadly. And I think, you know, something that, you know, perhaps kind of Martin and I should be really thinking about moving forward as well is how can we essentially come up with kind of like a training model so this can be replicated at other perhaps smaller arts organisations as well, because it's not, you know, there's what's that saying, you know, many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to teach a dance session, and I think it is in the approach. And I think for me, when, you know, reaching out to Martin in TinArts, it was because I really understood and respected their approach, because it's very similar to ours, although we're completely different organisations with completely different remits. The way that they approach dance is very similar to the way that we do in terms of engagement. You know, we're not going in and teaching technique and syllabus. This is really about using dance to unlock other things. And yes, within that core skills will be developed, you know, your balance, coordination, etc. But it really isn't about the way that we do that. And I've sort of said in the chat as well, obviously I'm going to champion this because I'm from Northern Ballet, but that link to the narrative, the characters, the stories, that emotional connection can really unlock getting involved in dance for a lot of children that might not think it's for them. I'll stop.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Heather, you wanted to come in.
It was just to update you, Chair, that Charlotte has now been able to join us. So it's fabulous that we've got her to join us from a head teacher perspective. And also there was one question in the chat from Hannah Watson from the National Arts Organisation, the National Centre for Creative Health, and she had a query about the longer term impact of some of the benefits and whether we were looking into those. So I just wanted to raise those to you.
Okay. Hannah, do you want to come in from the National Centre and just sort of give us some reflections?
Sure. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So thank you so much. It's been such a fascinating morning. Really great to hear about the programme and how rigorously it's all been evaluated and the impact that you're seeing. It's really great, and I'll definitely be going away and looking up some of those links. I think Laura's just done quite a good job of articulating what the National Centre is doing at the moment. I think Laura's one of our creative health champions, so we have a network of people working across different healthcare systems and arts organisations and ICSs, looking at how we can embed creativity further into health and social care systems. Just to say, Chris introduced the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Arts, Health and Wellbeing report earlier on. So our director and our chair were heavily involved in that inquiry, and the National Centre for Creative Health came out of that report as a strategic organisation to advocate for creativity in health and social care and in national policy. So at the moment we're running a review that Laura just mentioned, that's looking at how we can make recommendations to government to further embed creative health. So examples like this are really great to use as case studies to show where this is working really well. And yeah, I just noticed in the chat, I think it was when Martin started talking about signposting out to other activities. So I know it's not easy to do, but just seems like there's such a great opportunity to see how this impacts those young people over the long term. And so I was just wondering whether there were any opportunities for you to do that as part of this programme.
Martin, do you want to come back on that one?
Yes, sorry, I have to do the double click camera mic thing. Yes, absolutely, and I think that's one of our challenges. What's been really interesting, particularly with Star One, and I know Liani would talk about this, is it was difficult to understand the best way to capture that evaluation and change and impact, because especially with the younger pupils, their ability to kind of reflect back the feelings and how they were feeling about the process and what the impacts were. So it's been very much a collaborative approach with all the partners, particularly teachers in schools. We're fortunately Star 2, one of the schools involved in Star 1 is also involved in Star 2, so we're seeing the same young people go through that journey. What we're starting to, one of the conversations that's around the table now is how do we continue that journey and track those young people and what happens in the school if Star isn't physically being delivered in that school. And that's also the challenge with the likes of Charlotte from the school, is how do we support the school to continue to explore the passion for arts and creativity and dance. What we did in Star 1 is we looked at ArtsMark as a framework for both schools to try to embed and understand their arts journey, what's happening in schools, which kind of allowed us to incorporate Star within that. So it's still an area of inquiry, and Hannah, we'd welcome any observations, support, or learning you have from somewhere else that might help us understand how to do that as well. Actually, the final bit always comes down to is the resource. Finding funding to continue that journey behind it is always a thing. So we'll be able to work on goodwill and be able to work on existing partnerships, but we also need to try and make sure we resource not only the activity going forwards, but reflection and learning of what has already happened and sustaining and holding on to that.
Okay, Liani, you've got your hand up. I'm going to bring in Liani, and then I'm going to go to Charlotte Mott and Pat Chambers for some reflections, basically.
Yeah, just a little bit of thinking about the evaluation aspect and something that Martin responded. We had a lot of discussion. What was the best way to approach this? We started at the beginning trying some questionnaires, some well-being questionnaires, like we used like the Kids Screen questionnaire, which has been validated. It was challenging to do with that younger group. And teachers also thought that the language was not appropriate for even for the older group. So we went in circles, and I said, maybe because this is a kind of feasibility trial, let's go just to mainly to the qualitative measures that we did, just to get like a perception or feeling of what is going on. even the thing about long-term benefits, it's also challenging, because especially if you measure quality of life, because this is a kind of, it's a complex intervention. There is so much going on in children's life and so much going on at school. So how do you narrow that the effect is just the intervention? So having the immediate feedback sometimes is better, because if you're looking long term, how this could be sustained, lots of other things can happen throughout the journey. But I think if you do again, I would try again maybe to introduce like some questionnaires, quality of life questionnaires that look to physical and mental well-being, and maybe try to adapt, working with the teachers, or which questions we could maybe reduce to reduce the burden and help the understanding, and maybe also capture something about well-being of the family in general. Yeah, so I think, and also picking something that Chris said at the very beginning, the importance of the school readiness, maybe something looking later on to younger age groups, and how maybe dance could be incorporated to the younger group, and how that could impact on school readiness, which was very negatively affected during the COVID pandemic. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Liani. Charlotte, I'm going to bring you in here in terms of some interesting questions there, in terms of what was it like from a head teacher at Grangetown School, and sort of what about the sustainability question in terms of what happens after Star 1, if you like. Charlotte.
Hi everyone, I'm so sorry I was late joining the group. So when I've been thinking about this, we started off with the idea that the main areas that we were going to develop were the arts and mental health within school, but actually what happened through the process of Star 1 was lots and lots of other things happened in terms of changing perspectives of the children around arts and dance. It was developing opportunities for them to be able to be taught by specialists. It helped challenge stereotypes, especially with a lot of my boys not thinking that a career in dance was kind of a way forward for them. And then actually when through the programme of doing Star, they got to speak to male artists, they got to watch them doing live performances, and actually there was the realisation that if they wanted a job in this field, that it was a possibility. We found after COVID that one of the things that they found tricky was a lot of our children hadn't been very active. They hadn't had those opportunities to be active, but also that they'd kind of lost skills of working collaboratively. And with this programme, it was another way of looking at collaboration, which is a big thing for us, looking at collaboration, but through the arts. I think as well, the area that our school, the area I serve, is an area of high deprivation, and a lot of my children would never get the opportunity to go and see a live ballet performance. They would never have the opportunity to be able to go to dance classes because they're not so readily available and often cost a lot of money. And that was the children, but also it changed the perspective of the parents, because a lot of my parents had not experienced going to the ballet. At first they thought we were going to the pantomime, and I had to explain that it wasn't a pantomime, and explain actually that there wasn't going to be any talking, and that the skill of the artist was that they were going to tell the story through dance and through movement. And for some of my parents, that was a big learning curve as well. But what it did do is it gave the opportunity for them to talk about that as a family. They had a shared experience. And I think it brings me back to cultural capital. Like, I want my children in school to have the same experiences as my little girl does when she goes on a Saturday morning to her dance class. I want them to be able to show those skills. And I think one of the things that we found is we have a base attached to our school that serves children with significant needs of cognition and learning. And I think giving them the opportunity to be able to be extremely successful in an area of the curriculum where they could really express themselves. And this came out through some of the conversations they had with the filmmaker about they were able to express themselves through dance and art was really incredible. And that's why we've been so excited about having Star 2 take place and more children in school being able to experience the great work Rose does with our children. So for me, it's just been a real win-win opportunity. We've had artists during our half. So we had a summer school and Martin kindly asked for some artists. We had street dancers in and we had a storyteller in, and the children absolutely loved that. So that really gave kind of a different dimension to the half than what we would have had otherwise. So we've kind of forged links as well with some local organisations to be able to use them more in school. Yeah, and I think from a staff perspective, it's quite tricky, arts and dance, if you don't have a love for it, to then be able to teach that and inspire the children. But I think what it has shown the staff that I've spoken to is they've been working alongside Rose and giving them the opportunity to see how Rose does things and see how she puts things across to the children. It's been great CPD for them, and that CPD isn't readily available. You know, often teachers go off onto a course but they don't get to see it actually live with their own children in their class. So yeah, I've been a massive advocate from the start, but I've really loved being involved at Grangetown.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. I'm going to bring in Pat Chambers. Pat, it's from County Durham and Darlington Foundation Trust charity, and is our link to NHS charities. Pat, you've been very quiet, and just some quick reflections before we move on.
I think it's been absolutely inspirational, and for us, for those of you who are not aware, NHS Charities Together went from being a small association of charities pre-COVID to being the catalyst and contact for the umbrella of NHS organisations during COVID. And of course, they had ever such a lot of money that was being donated. And when they were looking to use this, it was extraordinary, some of the amounts they were getting when we ourselves weren't getting that locally. It was how could we best invest and do something? And as a member organisation, we voted on how that would be. And for us, this is something that was almost unprecedented in looking to do a collaborative project that would bring in grassroots organisations that are working at early intervention to hopefully be able to reduce in future the level of young people that we're seeing in our hospitals and in our care settings. And I'm a huge advocate of early intervention myself. And in my background, I know Amelia was astounded when I told her, but when my daughter was young, she's 24 now and at Lancaster University, I championed a project called Drug Abuse Resistance Education, because I recognised that there wasn't a common theme being driven to deliver early intervention. And if a child is living with an issue at home, they take that to be the norm, and they don't recognise it's not the norm unless we actually show them. So what I loved about here within the North East and North Cumbria was that projects were coming together collectively with a shared vision and mission of what they wanted to deliver, that would let young people experience something they wouldn't. And Charlotte hit it on the head. You know, if you don't think about it, young people, when they're in a poverty setting, are never going to be able to participate because the parents can't afford to send them to brownies or guides or scouts or whatever, or joining the football because they can't afford the kit, or be in a netball team because they can't afford the kit. And it's that thing about social and financial inclusion, and what came over to me very strongly, and what I've seen shared, and what we've been learning from ourselves in our own hospital settings, is how intrinsically important it is for us all to collaborate and work together. Because these, while it can only be seen maybe as small steps at the moment, but it makes a huge impact in a child's life. And again, I'm going to say from a personal thing, I know that because I've volunteered for St. Vincent de Paul and been on a holiday experience over at Holy Island. And the biggest memory I have is during 1 year, one of the volunteers coming back, sitting down as we're all introducing ourselves. And this young lady said to us, "I'm a Holy Island child." She said, "If I hadn't had this experience, I wouldn't have known my life could be different. But what it did was it opened my eyes to the opportunities that I could aspire to." And I think in everything that's been done here, it's raising the aspirations, raising the aspirations in young people. It does touch the families, and it does help change the values of the families. And again, mental health continues to be a rising issue. And in some way, and again, I know I'm repeating some of the things that Charlotte said there, but we're forgetting to talk to each other. And we get it in our life where we're busy. In fact, I just did a session yesterday at work called Time to Talk. It's because we rush down the corridor and say hello to everybody. "You okay? Yeah, fine. Keep on going. Don't break stride." And we're teaching our young children to do that. But the expression in arts and values is just extraordinary. And I think you've made a powerful impact.
Thank you for that, Pat.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Quick comment from me. We're nearly at an end. 3 minutes to go. Really a big thank you for all of our speakers and for all of the work that everybody has put into making this project such a success. The challenge now is to take it forward and to move it on from here, and to make it into something that is long-term sustainable and is something that we can roll out to schools in our more disadvantaged areas for the benefit of all. So big thank you to all of our speakers. I'm going to hand over to Emilia just for a final word about the Child Health and Wellbeing Network and what's on the horizon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. So I will just move through quickly a couple of slides that you'll get access to after the event. So Chris has already touched on the Core 20+5 framework. Our Healthier Together app and website are available, and there's links there to download the app. And find out a bit more about that. There's opportunities for communicating and engaging with the network. We've got a system engagement group, which meets bi-monthly to support reach across the system. And we also have huddles lined up, which leads me nicely to the future huddle in May 2023. So Martin is working on a creativity and health huddle, which we will share more information about in our Child Health Tuesday, which is a regular bulletin that comes out. We've also got an exciting project to be announced, so please keep an eye out for Child Health Tuesday. It'll be announced soon. And then we're going to look at how the role of a community of practice will help implement new STAR initiatives, which has been touched on a lot over the past couple of hours. And then we've also got the launch of our NIHR research into schools. So how can healthcare organisations research effectively into school settings, and that will be coming out in a couple of weeks' time. So the opportunity to sign up So here's our winter newsletter. So there's a QR code for you to access that, and then information and links. And Heather, I know, has shared the QR code in the chat. So any questions, please do get in touch with us. And thank you all very much for attending. There's a few different contacts there in our main email address as well.
Thank you, Amelia. And just to reinforce, do get in touch, everybody. It's been lovely to see you all this morning, and thank you all for your contributions. And have a good day. Bye now.